From what I'm being told, we finally got the connection issue sorted. We should be ready for another test within the next 10 minutes or so.
Sounds great. I'll be up here monitoring remotely, far away from anything that might accidentally explode if you screw up. As you can see, as it becomes closer and closer to time for me to relaunch my ship, me and my crew of identical clones have been having trouble getting some of the systems working. As bad a shape as my engines were in after everything that happened, we figured that the best shot we had of getting them working again was to hybrid them with some alien technology. Turns out, though, that's way more difficult than you would think, unless, I guess, you just happen to be way smarter than I am. But either way, looks like we're going to figure it out, and it did get me thinking about something else, something worth making a couple of videos about. And that's everyone's favorite alien hybrid Steven universe. Particularly, I want to explore some of the more interesting side effects of his hybrid nature. Due to being half gem and half human, Steven has a very interesting and unique biology. I've actually got a couple of ideas that I want to talk about on this topic, and while I originally planned to stick them both in one video, I do think it would be better if I split them up, which is why you've got all this time filler in the start of this one. Don't at me, bro. Making money on YouTube is hard. Anyway, this week we're going to be talking about Steven's birth and some of the inconsistencies surrounding it. And I know what some of you guys are going to say, that since this is a fictional universe, since it's a fantasy-based universe, there can't really be any inconsistencies. But I disagree, obviously. The fact of the matter is, Steven's birth has never really made sense. Back when we didn't know that much about it, we could kind of squint and imagine that it did, since we could make up any specific details we wanted to fill in the weird inconsistencies. But the more that we learn about it, the less sense it actually makes. And as awesome as the scene where Steven and his gem half were separated and then reunited was, not just in terms of animation, but also in terms of storytelling and theme, it only compounded the issue around Steven's birth by kind of, in a way, redefining what he is. Up until that point, we could kind of surmise that Steven was just a human who had some gem traits which were powered by the gem as sort of a battery. That the gem itself may have been attached to Steven's body, but it wasn't really a part of him per se. Since the implication had been, up to that point, that there wasn't anything of, say, Steven's personality, for example, on the gemstone anyway, that the only things stored there, information-wise, were things like his weapon, for example. But ever since Pink Steven emerged from the gem, formed from the gem, we've known that that isn't the case, that some personality data, for lack of a better term, still exists on the gemstone, even if it isn't Rose's personality data. And at the end of the day, that really only tells us that the gem was integrated into Steven far more than I expected that it ever was, especially since human Steven doesn't seem like he would live long without the gem there to support his gem attributes. But I've also seen some people claiming that once the gemstone and the human side of Steven were separated, there wasn't anything gem left in human Steven at all, and that simply cannot be the case. That cannot be the case, and what we have been told about Steven and Steven's birth in the past by the crew themselves in canon material still be true. Now, it's possible that Steven's entire nature has been retconned as of that scene in question, but assuming that it hasn't, I have some things to say. So let's real quick go over what we know about Steven's birth from the beginning. First of all, we do know that Rose shapeshifted herself a womb that she could use to bring Steven to term. So we do know that Steven grew like any other unborn child would have. That he started out as a couple of cells jammed together and developed into a fully viable human baby. We also know, thanks to some dialogue from Pearl in Guide to the Crystal Gems, which I remind you was written by Rebekah Sugar herself, to be a canon guide about the show, that Rose was able to provide the other half of Steven's genetic material by converting her gem information, her gem DNA for lack of a better term, into human DNA, into something compatible with Greg's DNA. Finally, we know that, at least according to Rose, she and Steven cannot exist at the same time. And that's actually what I take issue with, and I've actually had this headcanon, I guess you would say, for a long time, but I don't think that's true. And in fact, if you go back through the details that I just went back over with you guys, I'm sure you'll understand why I think that's the case. Like, there's no two ways about it. Rose literally said,
Steven, we can't both exist.
But the problem is, they did, for 9 months. Since Steven was able to develop into a fully viable human child from an embryo, just like any other human child, he must have had a complete genome during that entire time, even before Rose gave up her physical form in order to have him. That means that either Stephen was completely human beforehand, before Rose gave up her physical form and her gemstone in order to have him. That her information made some change to his genetic material, granting him with traits which were half derived from Rose's information as late as the time of his birth. Or half of his DNA was made of a copy of Rose's information and not the original thing, as it had been implied. Because the implication up to this point has always been that Rose couldn't copy her information and therefore had to use the source code, for lack of a better term, converting it directly into DNA to create Stephen, and that's why she couldn't exist alongside him. If it's the former, if he was completely human before Rose gave birth to him, then Rose should have been able to have a completely human child, a completely human Stephen, and actually raise him if she wanted to. Granted, that child wouldn't have had any of her traits, but I don't see why that would have been a problem, really. I mean, adoption is a thing, and adopted children do not have the traits of their parents. And if the latter is true, if Rose could copy her information and use that to provide half of Stephen's genetic material, then I don't see a reason why she couldn't have given birth to him normally as he is now. Like, yeah, sure, she wouldn't have been able to give him her own gemstone, but this is Pink Diamond we're talking about. Not only do we know that she has successfully managed to fuse gemstones with genetic material in the past, I remind you, of course, of that crazy moss and the flowers that it sprouted, but we also know that she can create gemstones. That as a diamond, she can create gemstones, and according to the crew, not just fake look-alike gemstones without any information on them, but real functioning gemstones. So, theoretically, she could have created a close enough facsimile of her own gem to give it to baby Stephen and allow him to exist at the same time that she did. And I know that some of the dialogue implied that Rose wanted to become a human, that she wanted to live that experience, but she's not, and she would have known that. Rose is gone. She is not currently experiencing what it's like to be a human through Stephen, and she would have known that. In short, it really seems as if there's either a very glaring contradiction here, or Rose didn't need to die. That she chose to die when Stephen was born because it was not necessary as she claimed that it was. Now, of course, I could be completely wrong. There could be some nuance to gem biology or technology that I'm not aware of that changes things, or we could be introduced to new information later on, which changes things. Or, as I suggested earlier, things might have been retconned and I'm just not realizing it yet. But as things stand now, I do unfortunately think, I do think that Rose could have remained alive to raise her child. I just don't see any reason why that isn't the case. But honestly, that isn't too out of character for Rose if you really think about it, but that's really off topic for this video, and I do plan to talk about it more down the line, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And either way, regardless of why Rose did what she did, or whether or not she had to or not, and yes, I am aware that Rose is a fictional character as I say this, if Rose hadn't done what she did, we wouldn't have Stephen as he is now, which I think would make for a far less interesting show. So at the end of the day, I am glad that Stephen is who and what he is. And would you look at that, he isn't the only alien hybrid that I'm thankful for right now. It looks like they got the engine working. Be sure to check in next week to see the second half of this video series on Stephen's biology, specifically pertaining to things that we learned in Change Your Mind. Since I was going to put all of it into this video and I didn't, I figured I'd give you guys a little bit of a teaser. Next week we're actually going to be talking about whether or not Stephen has been a pretty literal fusion of his gem and human halves, or if he's just that now, and whether or not that means that there's anything new or different about him. I hope you guys are excited about it, because I sure am. In the meantime, though, as per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of any of the ideas that I put forth in this theory? Or heck, try to guess what I'm going to talk about next week specifically. I'd love to see it. Let's get discussions on both topics going in the comments section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.